And we're live. Hey guys, welcome to Eye on Cricket. I'm with Mr. Kithmina, Hewage, Viren Berwalage, and Nicholas Brookes to discuss the Sri Lanka versus South Africa match that took place, the fourth match of the T20 World Cup. And it was a very interesting match indeed, a low scoring match, and we have a lot to talk about it. But first, before we get to the analysis, I'd just like to pass over to Viren, who would introduce our two special guests today.
Yeah, very special indeed, Junior. Firstly, to a brother, elder brother figure, mentor, Kithmina. For those of you who followed us on our social media platform for the past 3 years, the armchair review with Kit Tenviren is back and back with a bag. Yeah, it's nice having him back all the way from Hong Kong. Thanks for taking your time, Kit, to be here. It means a lot to have you on board. And yes, looking forward to getting your take on the Sri Lanka South Africa game. It would have been quite a late start for you in Hong Kong to follow it, but yeah, we're looking forward to getting your take on it. And then Nicholas
Thank you for having
Brookes,
me.
the man, the myth, the legend, the author of An Island's 11. You need to get your copies out now. This is a non-paid advertisement. You need to kind of get your own copy. Undoubtedly one of the best cricket writers I've come across, one of the most sound analysts I've come across too, and someone who cares so deeply about Sri Lankan cricket. And on a personal note, perhaps the most significant factor behind the rise of IU on cricket, with over 17,000 views on that episode we had together. And then we've had him on the show on many occasions, including that show we had with Mark and Merle when we had our all-time 11s, which created a lot of engagement and interest. It's great having you two here. Thank you for taking your time. And yeah, over to you, Junior.
Yes, very exciting discussion about to happen. First review that we're doing of the T20 World Cup. And I think we should start off with the toss. We went into this World Cup not knowing much about these new pitches in America. Uh, Kitman, I'd like to start off with you. Do you think it was the right call that Sri Lanka made, or that they made on the toss?
So, I mean, the obvious thing is hindsight is 2020. But I think looking back, I want to put ourselves in where the team management would have been as to what the decision was, right? And I think, unfortunately, place where Sri Lanka cricket is right now, we went into the World Cup and maybe the first game as well, like that kid who goes into an exam having studied only a few sections of the syllabus, right? So you really studied hard on some sections and you hope that every question you get, you can shoehorn in something that you've studied. And it felt like that going into when they won the toss and batted first, because that is what had worked in the series leading up to the World Cup. And we heard that from the management during the game. We heard that from the commentators as well. Bat first, put on a score, and then strangle the South Africans with spin. Having said that, it was very clear that this was a new pitch, a drop-in pitch, and having also looked at, and we didn't know how it would play out, right? We had seen one practice game, but it was unclear. And when you are going into a World Cup, I would have erred on the side of caution and put South Africa into bat first, just to see how it was. And also, I think when looking back, you know that South Africa tends to crumble during pressure situations in World Cups. Yes, this was a group game and not a knockout game, but have we put on some pressure on them while they were batting? I think they would have also gone through a similar situation to us, because they also lost early wickets and then kind of they were much more calmer because they didn't have to put on a score. So I think overall the better choice would have been to bowl first, but because we had we have this kind of game plan that has worked, but in certain circumstances they just went with it.
Yeah, I think as a batsman, I totally agree with that. You're going into an unknown pitch. You want to make sure that you take that chance to ball first and let your batters look at the pitch and how it's reacting. And on the basis of that, go ahead with your batting strategy. Viren, what did you think about that toss?
I mean, I posted this the other day. I want to know which individual in our think tank saw that strip in New York and thought it was a bat first kind of day. And my issue was not actually with the call. Yes, you can make the wrong decision at the toss, but it's adapting your approach accordingly. Wanindu Hasaranga, in his post-match presentation, and I quote, said we were looking at 165. But after the power play, when we were 30 for 1 after 6 overs, there should have been a message sent out to the batters that 125, 130 would be an imposing total. And that is my concern, Junior. It seemed like we went out with a plan A with the bat, and we never really adjusted throughout that innings. And yes, we made the wrong call, but it's always important to have your backup options in place if the first few overs don't go your way. And what was our backup option? Was sending in our pinch hitter at number 4, who had an ugly swipe off his second delivery. And then we sent out our anchor Sadira at number 5, who was dismissed off his very first ball. So I'm sure we'll have discussions on the roles, on role fulfillment, etc. in our middle order. But yeah, that was a pressing concern.
Yeah, I think that was a very interesting decision to send the captain himself, to send him himself at number 4. Just a while ago we were reviewing that LPL auction, and we were thinking about how Hasaranga should get a chance to bat up the order because of how he's performed with the bat over the years. But obviously, I think, as you said, the idea of going for 165 straight away, he came in with that aggressive mindset, I guess, thinking, I want to see what's happening with this pitch. Why aren't our batters being able to perform? And I think he took that approach a bit too aggressively. Nicholas, what do you think about their batting approach, sending Wanindu at number 4, and the decision to bat first itself?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Kit and Viren said, that hindsight is 2020, but I don't see really why you would look at this pitch and think that it was a bat first wicket. I think the one kind of possibly redeeming factor that we've got is what we've seen coming out about these travel arrangements and the fact that Sri Lanka maybe didn't have proper time to get a look at the pitch. But I think, as Viren said, the real worry is the fact that, from the first 3-4 overs, I've never seen the ball beat the bat so many times in a T20 match. And the fact that Sri Lanka weren't able to pivot and weren't able to realize that this pitch was an absolute minefield. And instead it looked like they were kind of panicking and thinking, what's wrong with us? There was nothing wrong with them. It was the surface they were playing on. And I mean, I think 2 examples really stick out. Pathum Nissanka, the first ball that he faced against Bartman, which I'm pretty sure would have been the first ball that he's faced against Bartman in any kind of cricket. I don't think he's probably seen a lot of Bartman, and he's like, I haven't been able to get anything away in the first 3 overs. I'm going to hit this for 6. I mean, it's a bad pitch. It's a bowler you haven't seen. Surely have a look. And then, yeah, I mean, if there's one time when you don't want to see Wanindu bumped ahead of Sadira, I think this was it, right? A time when it's clearly a knock it around for 1s and 2s. And then if Hasaranga is going to bump himself, surely he's just got to take a couple of balls to have a look. I think, as Viren said, I think it was 24 for 1, the power play, which wasn't great. But for me, it was that 6 to 10 over period where the game was really lost. And especially you look at Kamindu, Hasaranga and Sadira, those 3 guys were dismissed within the space of 4 or 5 balls. And, you're 40 for 5 at the end of 10. And at that stage, like, getting any score on the board is just really, really tricky. And actually, I think Sri Lanka, given the context of that first 10 overs, did all right in the second 10 overs to get themselves up to 77. But yeah, so more than anything skill-based, for me, the real problem was psychology and mentality, the lack of flexibility, the failure to read the wicket and pivot. And I mean, there was no way that this was a 160 pitch. At times in the first 10 overs, I thought they were batting like they thought it was a 180 pitch. And really, I think we probably all agree that like 120 would have been a really challenging target. And had their approach been a bit better, I think they could have got there.
Yeah, I think they went out at one point almost trying to hit every ball out of the park, and it didn't work out well for them. And just to add on to the point you mentioned about Bartman, I remember thinking, watching the game, this player, no disrespect to him, by the way, but this is a player who's been added to the 11 to fulfill the quota of 2 black cricketers in the South African 11 at all times. And a bowler like that, who you have not seen much in international cricket, comes in, and creates a record, becoming the first South African to get a wicket on his first ball in a World Cup. So that was a very bad decision by Nisanka. I definitely agree. I would like to talk about the 11 more specifically and whether this was the right 11 to go for Sri Lanka. Kithmina, from what we saw in the Bangladesh versus India warm-up game, it was evident that some bowlers with high arm actions got more assistance of the death. It was evident in Sri Lanka's game as well when bowlers like Dasun were tough to face. Dube was also tough to face in the warm-up game. Should Sri Lanka have gone for Chamira instead of two slingers?
Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely believe that we should have gone with Chamira. One is because of his control with the pace and he's kind of seams the ball, but also that high arm action that would have really worked on that pitch. But I just want to kind of add on to what Nick and Viren said about kind of not reading the conditions. We have a history of this, of not starting World Cups well, right? So during the past five World Cup games, T20 and 50 overs, we've lost four of our first matches, right? And I think this speaks to, and Nick, I think you're being generous by kind of saying it's probably because they had logistics issues and not seeing the pitch. But surely the logistics didn't become an issue for the past four World Cups as well, of kind of losing to Namibia, losing to New Zealand, losing to South Africa in the previous World Cups. So I think there is this concern for me within the think tank of the team about how we approach big tournaments and this inability to read pitches. And I think this is twofold. One is the think tank, the coaches, the consultants, the advisors, and all, but also the players' skills, right? So I think partly because of the pitches that they play on in Sri Lanka, and kind of it's pretty much similar across the board, their ability to read pitches at these tournaments during the game becomes problematic, right? So I don't know how much in feedback is being given and so on. But I think, so this is one thing, but also, like you said, I think in terms of selection, they got it wrong. I'm also not sure whether Teekshana was the best bowler on that pitch, because Teekshana tends to struggle on slightly slower pitches when it's not turning. So when it's like one of those sticky pitches, it's easier to play him off the back foot because he doesn't spin it much, and he needs that ball to kind of go through. So I wasn't necessarily sure about Teekshana on that pitch either. I would have preferred Chamira. I would have actually preferred Chamira for Teekshana, but and kind of had the two slingers on as well. But I Chamira had to be in that 11.
Viren, what do you think about the 11 as a whole, and what do you think were the missing pieces?
I completely agree with everything Kit just said, but I want to make one quick point known. Prior to the game, I did say that Bartman would be South Africa's X factor. He had a brilliant SA T20, and I knew that there was a lack of preparation in there. I don't think, I mean, if we can't assess conditions, I doubt we've assessed South Africa's bench strength at this World Cup. But I think that was a huge factor that kind of led to us being in that rut. Because when Bartman came on, I think our guys realized that this was something that they hadn't prepared for and tried to take the attack to Maharaj, who they thought would be South Africa's weak link. And that turned out to be a disaster. So that's where we go back to that initial question, and Kithmina put it perfectly in terms of planning and preparation. In terms of the 11, I don't think you have to look beyond the fact that when a guy who trudges in at 120 with the new ball for Sri Lanka causes problems, and Dasun Shanaka ends up being our best pacer on the day, with no disrespect to either Dasun or Angelo, that is proof that bowlers with fairly normal / high arm actions are those that thrive on those conditions. And unfortunately for us, this is the issue when we were overloaded. There was choice overload in terms of our pace department, which we've never had before. Nick and I spoke about this the other day. You have 4 frontline seamers going into this World Cup. And I think we left the 2 most suited for these conditions on the bench in Dilshan Madhushankar and Dushmantha Chamira. I'm going to call this right now, watch them being brought in to Dallas on a batting friendly deck against Bangladesh, and Dushman Chamira having nightmares of what happened during the IPL, during that one outing he had for KKR. And then I'm going into looking at the middle order. And my main issue here, we have a tendency of being very reliant on having this so-called anchor in the middle order. I don't see the point of having one in the middle order in T20 cricket, in modern T20 cricket, but we've earmarked Sadira Samaravikram as being our anchor. But as Nick aptly put it earlier, if you don't send him in at 32 for 2 in these conditions, when are you going to utilize him to his full potential? If you and that is where I pose the question. We could have even gone into this game one batter short, brought in another seamer, and still been fine. And yes, I'll pose this question to. I'll let Nick carry on with this question from Laksisi. Hi guys, what are your thoughts on Sadira's role in the side? If Wani has come to bat at number 4, is there a need to play Sadira? Brilliant question, Laksisi. Over to you, Nick.
Yeah, I really don't understand Sadira's role in the side. I think the fact that he had such a good ODI World Cup, they just kind of shoehorned him in and felt that they needed him in the T20 side as well. But, I mean, you look around at international cricket and franchise cricket, how many teams are playing a guy with Sadira's profile who isn't really a boundary hitter, whose, I think, strike rate is probably around 120? How many sides are playing a guy like that at number 4, number 5? And yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't really understand quite what role he's playing. I wouldn't be surprised if we see him subbed out for Friday night in Dallas. And just to echo what Viren and Kit said, I mean, this was a pitch. If you look at the two sort of identifying features of this pitch, it was variable bounce and lots of seam movement, right? A pitch where every high arm traditional seamer who can stand the seam up cause nightmares, even Ange and Shanaka, who are bowling mid 70 miles an hour. So then to pick your two slingers, guys who don't really get variable bounce and who aren't going to get seam movement ahead of two more traditional seamers, just, I mean, again, hindsight's a cruel beast, but it looks crazy. For me, yeah, the biggest takeaway from this game was just that decision-making from top to bottom was really, really baffling and hard to explain. And I hope that, as Viren mentioned, the temptation might be to take Patirana and Tushara out for Dallas and sub them in for Madhushanka and Chamira. I hope that doesn't happen, because that would just, to me, look like another brain fade and a sign that this game really got into Sri Lanka's heads.
Nick, who would you play instead of Sadira?
I think for Friday, given that Bangladesh have four left-handers in their top 6, I could actually see the reason behind bringing DDS in. More generally, I think I'd like to see Sri Lanka go with 3 frontline seamers. And so they've got a 5-man attack, and Angelo and Shanaka's bowling is really there as a kind of backup option. I think given the squad that Sri Lanka have, that's the kind of best way they could go. I know he hasn't played much cricket over the past 12 months and there's not a lot of success, but I do think that Barnaker, if he was in the squad, might come in for Angelo or Shanaka, so that you've got a bit more ballast in that lower middle order, and then you can play 5 frontline bowlers with Angelo or Shanaka as a 6th option rather than the 2 of them together. But we've got what we've got, and I can't see either of those guys making way because I don't really see who the other finishing options are.
Very true, very true. I think just talking about South Africa's bowling in more detail, I think one of the panelists said something that really posed an interesting question. In a pitch where there wasn't much spin, it wasn't favoring the spinners a lot. Viren, why do you think Keshav Maharaj saw the success and was able to be economical and take wickets at the same time?
I think he was quite lucky in terms of shot selection. Hasaranga offered him a freebie. And Sadira, and this is something I've seen in the recent past, especially in T20 cricket, Sadira is very, very tentative early on. He takes a while to settle in. And that was just a one-handed swipe. I don't even want to call it a swipe. It was just a one-handed prod at the ball and cleaned him up inside out. And I want to highlight shot selection before I get to your question on Keshav Maharaj. I think we're letting Dasun Shankar go away unscathed here. at 64 for 6. Matthews was striking the ball quite nicely at the other end. We seem to be beginning our process of recovery, looking towards that 115, 120. And for a delivery that comes in straight, doesn't do much, he has a Murali-like swipe at it, with no disrespect to our great Murali, and misses it completely. And he didn't miss it by an inch; he missed it by a mile in terms of not reading the line of the delivery, and that was concerning from a former captain. And when you have 3 or 4 former captains in this side, you'd expect one of them to showcase some leadership, and that was very, very concerning. And this is where you want people to start taking responsibility. In that post-match press conference, Wanindu said, "Oh, all our batsmen are attacking in terms of their approach." But look at what the likes of Roston Chase did in that chase against Papua New Guinea. He knew what was expected of him. He knew what he had to do. You look at players like Max O'Dowd for Netherlands yesterday, a very uncharacteristic knock, but he got the job done. And if you don't have players who are willing to put in the hard yards, who are willing to go against the grain, to be out there because the team requires them to be there, that is my concern with our batting lineup. And to answer your question on Maharaj, just sheer experience and just keeping it tight. That was all that was required. And I think he did it quite well.
That's definitely an interesting point. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, just to add, I think so. This was my concern at the end of the match, right? So after Shanaka's wicket, I wonder at what point the team realized that 120 would be a good score. I was wondering whether even when Shanaka and Angelo were batting, whether they were still aiming for about 140. And it was maybe only after Shanaka was out, which meant, you had the tail enders coming in, that they were then assessing, okay, at least get to 120. So even at that point, it felt like they hadn't read the pitch and what a good score would be.
And Kit, just chipping in there, I want to pose this question to Nick. I read this stat this morning. In our past 30 T20 games, we haven't batted out our 20 overs in 36% of our matches. Is that a concern? Yes, we've spoken about our batting frailties and batting woes, but when you can't bat out 20 overs, is that the perfect example or the apt example of our crises with the bat?
Yeah, I mean, that's a massive concern, right? You should not be getting bowled out in T20 cricket regularly, or even, I don't think it should even be happening 10% of the time, especially in a situation where you've essentially got 8 guys who would probably consider themselves as frontline batters, right? You've got Shanaka batting at 8. And I think you're right to level some criticism at Dawson for the manner of his dismissal. And I also think that you've Dawson and Angelo are in the middle, right? In the back overs. You know that what you've got in the shed is Tikshana, Tushara and Patirana. How many runs can you expect from those 3 guys? I know we've seen Deeks do okay on occasion, but I think that you've got to think, regardless of what you're looking at as a potential target, I think if you're Angelo and Dawson there, you've got to think the way we're going to make the most runs is by us 2 guys staying in the middle for 20 overs. And once you get into 18, 19, 20, those last 3 overs, maybe you can look to expand a bit. But yeah, I think it's just another example of the kind of thinking being slightly misplaced, the brain's trust going missing. And I actually think that Sri Lanka didn't really identify how bad a pitch this was until they started bowling and they saw what Angelo and Dawson were doing on it.
Is absolutely. I think throughout this analysis, we have treated it as if the game was over after the first innings, and that may be true. But we saw in the second innings that it wasn't easy for South Africa as well. We saw, the likes of Tristan Stubbs, the likes of Heinrich Klaassen play very uncharacteristic innings with a strike rate of below 100 again, seeing what happened to Sri Lanka in that first innings. So, Kithmina, would you say that Sri Lanka had some chance in that second innings of coming in with a clutch and somehow getting rid of these top players, which they did, 4 of them in fact, and clutching a victory? Or do you think they obviously needed a couple more runs? Or how would you commend South Africa? And an extension of that question would be, how would you see this pitch playing out for the rest of the tournament? What are your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, to be honest, I thought the game was over after our innings, because the pressures are different, right? So if they had were, well, I think they were also 20 odd for two, right? So
Hmm.
had they been batting first at 20 odd for two, and they were at a very similar stage of us at the end of their power play, if they had read the pitch similar to us or were still aiming for about 140, they would have got into trouble. But the thing is, you are batting second, you are chasing 70. So they had that safety net, so to speak, of just batting through the overs. And if they batted through the overs, they were going to win the match no matter what. I think what it was good of us to kind of take the game because we didn't take a massive hit on our net run rate. So that's one sliver of positivity at the end of the match, because after you get bowled out for 70, you're more likely than not to kind of for the opposition to chase that within 10 overs in a T20 game. So that didn't happen. So that's a good thing. So I think, but in terms of how the pitch will play, I'm not really sure. Maybe once the pitch beds in and kind of it gets baked a bit in the sun, with these pitches. I mean, we are playing on kind of new pitches, so you never really know how it will play as the tournament progresses. I think even in Dallas, we saw the first match was a batting paradise. Then the conditions changed for yesterday's game with Nepal and the Netherlands. You have to kind of account for those variations. But I honestly think that's all kind of you're finding excuses if you say these pitches are difficult and stuff, because at the end of the day, it's not like some of the Indian pitches that we played the last World Cup in, where fielding first was the obvious advantage, where Dew comes in and you can't bowl at all, right? You can't even hold the ball. There was no such disadvantage. The pitch pretty much played throughout the game in the same way. It's just that the pressures that were involved with setting a total versus chasing were different, and that led to a different outcome.
Absolutely. I think we'll take this question from Adil. Uh, it's something that Kithmina touched upon in his first remarks. Hi guys, great stat from Viren about our inability to bat 20 overs, but we preferred batting first in most of our recent games, irrespective of conditions. Why are we so obsessed with batting first? And I think that question is open to the panel. I think he mentioned that our last couple series as Sri Lanka haven't been that have been quite successful when they're batting first. But what else is that reason for batting first all the time? Viren.
Yeah, and I can't wait to hear Nick's take on this. I think Wanindu said it, and I think he basically opened himself up to criticism by saying this at the press conference when he said, "Bowling is our strength, batting is our weakness. We need to defend our weakness by attacking with our strength towards the end," which does not make any sense. Like I was trying to create the logical links there, but I failed to do so. And you'd expect to back your strength first, especially in unknown conditions. And as Kit said, if South Africa were in the exact same spot as we were after the power play,
Hmm.
and this is something people forget. People who have predicted South Africa to have very deep runs in this World Cup aren't taking into account the fact that they don't have much batting depth. After Marco Jansen bats at number 7, and they have a long tail at 8, 9, 10, and 11 with guys who can chip in, but not people who are very reliable with the bat. And this going back to your earlier question, I'm one of the most hopeless optimists linked to Sri Lankan cricket. If Kusal Mendis latched on to that opportunity, and if South Africa were 23 for 3, right, we saw that Tristan Stubbs wasn't very comfortable out there. If we got back-to-back wickets then, David Miller would have been under immense pressure. And yes, he's thrived under pressure against Sri Lanka before. We only have to go back to 2021. Well, our gas man, Lahiru Kumara, had to face the wrath of David Miller at Sharjah. But it's just about being strategic, right? When you don't know your conditions, why not back yours? And when your strength is bowling first, why not go ahead with it? Teams that have preferred batting first. I go back to 2011 when India had this approach. They had a stacked batting lineup. They wanted to bat opposition out of the game in the first innings. So they always opted to bat first whenever they had the opportunity of doing so, which is why Sangakkara against the grain may have thought, let's put the Indian batting lineup under pressure and make them chase at the Wankhede. But once again, why not back your strength? And this is where I think we've been quite defensive in terms of our approach. I'm trying to just, you're posing a question, Junior, that I don't have the answer to, because quite clearly our think tank does not have have the logical links in place. But Nick, I'm keen to get your take on this.
Yeah, I find it equally baffling, Viren, because I think we've seen in T20 cricket and in 50 over cricket that Sri Lanka, one of their really big problems in terms of batting has been pacing an innings. And it seems like the batters are much more confident and comfortable when they've got a target and they know what they're working towards, rather than having to try and assess the pitch and think on the fly and, set a score. And also, I think all of us would agree that if we were going to be asked where Sri Lanka's strengths lie in terms of batting versus bowling, it's massively weighted in favor of the bowling attack, right? And then you throw in the uncertainty of the pitch, the fact that there's literally no data as to what a good score is at this ground. You've got no idea how the pitch was going to play. I just don't understand what the obsession is with batting first. And you would think that if they bowled first, they would have been able to put South Africa under some real pressure. And how different would Sri Lanka's innings have looked were they going out chasing 110, 115, 120? I don't think you would have seen Kusal Mendes clumping balls into the leg side over and over again. I don't think you would have seen Pathum getting out in the way he did. I don't think you would have seen Wanindu be batting in that situation. So yeah, the uncertainty here was, it really hurt Sri Lanka.
I think Nick answered this question through those last couple hypotheticals, but just go delving into this point a bit more. Do you think the lack of confidence in the batting lineup to chase any sort of target is valid, or do you think they should have more trust in their batting order instead of claiming it to be a weakness, Nicholas?
I don't see any reason why they shouldn't be starting to have some confidence in their batting lineup, right? I thought they batted at times really well in the Bangladesh T20 bilateral series, which came a few months back. And look, I go back to the 50 over World Cup, completely different type of pitch, a Delhi road that Sri Lanka started that tournament on. But you saw, even chasing a target that was 400 plus, how they came out and looked to really attack that in the power play and bat with real confidence. That's like something, a little glimmer that they can take into this World Cup. And, I don't see why there shouldn't be confidence in this batting lineup. As I've touched on, they bat deep down to 8. You've got 8 guys who can come out and make scores. So I think they need to have more confidence. I think that really mentality and confidence is one of the biggest issues that we've seen kind of scupper Sri Lanka over the past 12 months in white ball cricket. And as I think Viren touched on earlier, when things don't go right instantly, it seems that there's that moment of panic that sets in. And I think we can be pretty critical about almost all of the wickets that we saw. Even on a really bad pitch, you look at Charith and Kamindu's dismissals, right? Both of them just kind of timing balls, tapping them down deep backward square legs throat, and they rankle. So I really hope that Sri Lanka can let this performance go, because we've seen in the past how bad showings can often lead to a downturn in momentum. And so I hope that the messaging around the squad is that this was a total anomaly game on a bizarre pitch, and that the tournament starts on Friday, and that everyone needs to forget about what happened on Monday afternoon.
And if I can quickly chip in there, Junior, before you get Kit's take on this, a brilliant question by Adil. And I'm looking at 2 or 3 chases that come to mind with this exact same top order. One was against Bangladesh in 2021 in Sharjah. Everyone expected it to be a low-scoring affair, but Bangladesh posted a total in excess of 170. And against the grain, against all odds, we chased it down. Thanks to Charita Salanka and Bhanuka Rajapaksa, who we all missed in this squad. It was a no-brainer for me. We had to have a finisher in there. Bhanuka had to be in the squad. So I looked at that particular chase. There was also this chase against Pakistan in the Asia Cup virtual semi-final at Kettarama, where we had to go at over 6 runs per over, albeit in a different format in the 50 over Asia Cup, where Charita Salanka got us over the line of the final delivery to get us into that final against India, right? We would have maybe saved ourselves the embarrassment of going into the Premadas and leaving 1 hour later, messaging both Kit and Nicholas, telling them that I'm off 1 hour later. But those are two chases that come to mind. And this is where I go back to what I said earlier, right? If we had restricted them to 120, 130, and Nick put it perfectly, our approach would have been different. Our batters would have had a target or a target to achieve. And we've seen how players like Dasun Shanaka tend to thrive when they know a target in mind. Go to that game against Australia in Pallekele, where we needed 50 off the final 3 overs, and Dasun trusted his abilities to get us over the line. So we've had instances where our batting order has clicked. So and looking at and I want to jump into what Nick just said. I said this last week, which was quite controversial. I looked at the game against South Africa as a dead rubber, as a warm-up game of sorts for the rest of our World Cup campaign. Our World Cup campaign starts on Saturday against Bangladesh. With the predetermined seedings, if South Africa goes through, we would have obviously finished second. So this is our battle to finish second that commences against Bangladesh in Dallas.
It's very interesting. In fact, I think definitely would like to get Kithmina's take on this. Why is Vanundu claiming that their batting is a weakness? Why are they consistently downplaying, underestimating their batting?
I think it's a mentality problem within the team. In terms, I think we tend to try to overthink a lot of things. Viren knows this. When I coach debating, I always say, just focus on controlling the controllables. You can't control how long you're going to travel from your hotel to the ground. You can't control what the pitch is going to be like. You can control your own skill set. You can control your performances and what you've been training, right? So I think the problem is, I actually think my theory is not necessarily that we are not confident with our batting, but rather I think we were afraid of South Africa's batting. And we were afraid of being battered out of the game because of how strong the South Africans were and the kind of their big hitters in that top and middle order. And having gone through the previous game of kind of conceding 400 to South Africa as well, I have a feeling, and I have no kind of insights into the team management, but I have a feeling that they gambled of saying, if we post a competitive score, we can put South Africa under pressure. However, if South Africa bat us out and score 180, it's going to be difficult for us. And I think it's less to do with a lack of confidence in our skills, but rather kind of being overcome and kind of being nervous about and being afraid, basically, about South Africa. And that is concerning. I mean, if you're an international team competing in a World Cup, just focus on your game, regardless of who you're going up against.
I think that's a very interesting point that a lot of teams will have to battle out. A team like India, which has the marketing power behind it, a lot of teams are going to be intimidated. And I think that was definitely a valid point why Sri Lanka would have, overestimated the batting strength of South Africa in this pitch as well. Just talking about this pitch in general, wanted to add on, as a cricket fan, it's going to be interesting to see some of the world's greatest batsmen to see them adapt to this pitch and find ways to score runs. Coming out of a season of the IPL that was a complete batting dominance, I want to see some struggles, batsmen facing struggles on the pitch and finding ways to overcome it. Hamza has posted an interesting question here. If Sadira is going to play in this side, he has to bat at the top. If not, no point of playing him. So if Sadira is not in that top order, Viren, would you agree with Nicholas when he's saying that DDS is the right option to go for here, or someone who's better down the order?
Mr. Dependable, Dhananjay De Silva over Sadira any day for me in these conditions. And I want to latch on to something that Kit just said before we start looking ahead to the playing conditions in New York and the Bangladesh game. Sri Lanka tends to have recency bias in our decision making. Apparently, the call to pick both Patirana and Tushara was influenced by the fact that Tushara thrived in the SA20 and South African batsmen struggled against slings. So we decided to give them the double dose. If that exists, we are playing Dunit Wellalage against Bangladesh because Bangladesh batsmen struggled against him in the BPL. And this is where we don't, and as Kithmina said, we tend to overanalyze our opposition, overanalyze our track record against them. As Kit said, our battering in Delhi against the South Africans may have caused us to be defensive and opt to bat first. And this is where I think it's time Chris Silverwood single-handedly leads the side in terms of decision-making. I think there are too many cooks that spoil the broth with Sri Lanka cricket at World Cups. I'm not pointing any fingers at previous regimes, etc., but we've had the best minds come together for World Cup campaigns. Mahela Jayawardene made an appearance, Sanat Jayasuriya makes an appearance, but it's Chris Silverwood who faces the brunt of issues in those cycles between World Cups. So I don't think it's fair for there to be a change in the decision maker at world events when it's been Chris Silverwood and in this case Silna Kandambi making the decisions over the past few months. Yes, we are blessed to have a good backroom staff, the likes of Akib Javed, Upul Chandan, etc. But those are add-ons. I think there has to be a single mind making these decisions. And I hope, and I sincerely hope, it's not just Manindu Hasaranga making these calls. He's backed up by leaders in the side like Angelo Matthews. We know of their friendships off the field. But I hope this is not influencing their decision making when it comes to playing 11s, etc. And Nick, I'm going to pose this question to you. I wanted to post a tweet on this. Do you think the BCCI is already preparing a drop-in wicket to be brought into New York ahead of the India-Pakistan game? Because the prospect of facing Shaheen Shah Afridi, Mohammad Amir, Nasim Shah and co on this trip is a bit of a difficult one to digest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an absolute nightmare for the BCCI. I'm sure they would have been watching Monday's game and there were some people tearing their hair out because I think India play... Is it 3 or 4 of their group games? All four in New York. And, you know, this kind of pitch can be a great leveler. I'm eager to see what happens at the Ireland game because, you know, they've got some good seamers. And look at the damage that Dasun Shanaka and Angelo Matthews were able to do to South African batters, you know, a really prime, aggressive batting lineup. You see a guy like Tristan Stubbs, who's just come off an IPO where he's struck at 190. I think he was 10 off 23 at one stage. So, yeah, this isn't great for India. But ICC tournaments are ostensibly about impartiality, right? And so I do feel that, you know, they've already bagged themselves a semi-final on a spinning wicket. They've stacked their squad full of spinners. So maybe if they're up on a minefield, it might be a little bit of karma coming into play.
They might move this game to Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, or the road outside the ground.
Looking ahead to the Sri Lanka game against Bangladesh, you know, in a pitch like Dallas, where we have seen 2 very different games. First of all, hats off to Aaron Jones for the entertaining innings he played in that first game. Brilliant innings to watch. It was like a baseball cameo in cricket for me. And I'm excited to see how that game goes. Because at one end you have Canada versus United States where you see 200 and then Nepal versus Netherlands, you see them struggling to get to that 100 mark. So Nicholas, what do you think should be Sri Lanka's approach going into this game? You know, we've all agreed that Sri Lanka's approach was not right going for that 165 mark in this game. What should be Sri Lanka's approach? If they win the toss, what should they opt to do first?
I mean, they have to assess the pitch better. And obviously it's difficult to say 3 days out from the game without having a look at the wicket. But I would be very tempted to bowl first. So at least they've got that kind of insurance policy that they can see what Bangladesh do and have a target to work towards. I think I'd also look to leave Sadira out of this game and either bring in a third seamer or bring in DDS, who, I mean, if they do go with 4 left-handers in their top 6, an extra off-spinner could be really valuable. Or they might think that they can get some overs out of Kamindu, maybe an over out of Charith. It's tough to see, but I think that, yeah, they have to identify the wicket better. If it's a flat pitch, Tushara and Patirana probably are the right way to go. So the decision making has to be better. It has to be clearer thinking throughout. And I think Viren's right to touch on Chris Silverwood's role, because Hasaranga's been taking a lot of stick the past few days. But it's, he's not the only brain in the truss, so to speak. And Chris Silverwood's an experienced guy who's played masses of county cricket. And I mean, this looked like a really dodgy English club wicket, except for the fact that, the occasional ball was leaping up. So, I mean, Silverwood's got to be there. He's got to be having a word as well and getting his input across. But yeah, I just hope that we see a slightly more considered performance on Friday night, Saturday morning. And I'm confident that this team is better than Bangladesh, that it has what it takes to get past Bangladesh. And yeah, the tournament starts then. And I think a good win really should get Sri Lanka's momentum going, and that we'll still have enough to get through to the next round.
Kithmina, what are your thoughts on making any changes to the playing 11 or the game plan going towards this game?
No, I absolutely agree with Nick. I think the first and foremost thing is to read the pitch well. So it's difficult to kind of decide on the game plan for us now from kind of Hong Kong, Sri Lanka, and so on. If at all, I agree Sadira, DDS for Sadira because of the 4 left-handers that Bangladesh have as well. And potentially Madhushankar for Patirana. Because of the left arm seam element. I think it gives a little bit more variation to our attack. And because it's a morning game, it's a night game in the US. So under the lights, it can swing a little bit, I'm guessing. I don't really know what the conditions are like in Texas, but potentially that might help Madhushankar more than Patirana. So, but again, I think it all depends on the pitch. I think we need to assess the pitch well. I think, Nick, the problem is the brain's doesn't trust their brain. So that's creating all the problems right now.
Viren, what are your thoughts about this game?
Yeah, I hope I'm going to set my alarm for 6 a.m. I hope I'm not timed out from watching the game. Sorry, that was a bad joke, Kit. But yeah, in all honesty, I think it's been a tale of 2 halves in terms of day games versus night games in the US thus far. Day games have been low-scoring affairs. Night games have tended to produce some high scores, except for that Namibia versus Oman game. But I said this on a show last week as well. I hope we go into this game leaving all the external factors aside. This Nagin rivalry, the timed out incident. I hope Matthews doesn't get irked by seeing Shakib Al Hasan walking out the back. Simple things like this, right? Because these are the simple things that tend to take us astray with the Sri Lankan side right now. So I hope we retain our composure, because as Nick said, if you take our team sheet and Bangladeshers, we should win this quite comfortably. I think the one linchpin that we need to watch out for, actually 2 rather, are one, Mustafizur Rahman coming in with some brilliant form under his belt from the IPL to that one game he played against the US. And then Rishad Hussain. I've seen him bat, and he's a brilliant all-rounder. We saw what he did to Manindu Hasaranga in that final T20 against Bangladesh. And I hope that there's no repeat of that. So yes, as long as we maintain our temperament, as long as we read conditions well enough, and as long as we can see the difference between day games and night games in the US, and not make those radical changes that I think we might make in terms of making significant changes to our 11, I think we should be all right. But one thing I want to stress, and this is something Nick highlighted on one of our groups the other day, I want to see Patum Nisank and Kusal Mende stamping their authority over proceedings together. When the 2 of them get going, it's the perfect foundation for our middle order. But they've struggled in the recent past in T20 cricket, and I hope they find their groove on Saturday morning.
All right, that was the post-match review of Sri Lanka versus South Africa. I think we had really good insights in there. Excited to watch the game, which will be starting in an hour. India versus Ireland. We'll see how India performs on this pitch. The panel has added to my nervousness as an Indian fan. But anyway, I think excited to watch the rest of the T20 World Cup and cover it with you guys here at Ion Cricket. Stay tuned. Thank you.